Good afternoon, members of the media, wider listening and viewing public of Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome to this week's post-Cabinet media briefing. It's indeed a pleasure to be back. We've gone a couple of weeks without it. And there are three topics I'd like to bring to the public's attention today through you. The first is my colleague and Cabinet member, Minister Maxi Cuffy. Unfortunately, there has been a lot of speculation and unfortunately a lot of speculation in the media as well with respect and with regard to the health of Minister Maxi Cuffy and his condition. I am happy to tell the public of Trinidad and Tobago here today that this morning I spoke to both Minister Maxi Cuffy as well as to his wife. They're both in Washington, D.C. Minister Maxi Cuffy is in very high spirits. He is going through a period of specialized rehabilitation that is going very, very well. And as I said, I spoke to him personally this morning. So I can tell the public of Trinidad and Tobago via personal evidence that Minister Maxi Cuffy is doing very well. His rehabilitation is going extremely well. His family is in constant contact with us at the government level. We respect a certain level of privacy that they would want maintained. We continue to pray for his speedy recovery, and by all accounts, that is in fact happening. He told me he's undergoing at least 6 hours a day of rehabilitation, exercise, therapy, etc. And by all accounts, it is going very well, and he's actually ahead of where his doctors want him to be. So on your behalves, that is the public of Trinidad and Tobago, as well as the government of Trinidad and Tobago, we continue to pray for Minister Maxi Cuffy for a speedy recovery, and may he return to Trinidad and Tobago in the near future in good health. And we also pray for his family and those of his friends, etc., that continue to support him. The second topic that I'd like to announce here today, and there would be more details following in the coming days or within the next week, is you would be aware that there was a recent convention in the People's Republic of China where they elected a new leadership and reconfirmed some of the current leadership, including the president. And coming out of that People's Republic of China conference, invitation was sent to the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago to be one of 10 world leaders to attend high-level meetings in Beijing, China, at the end of this month. We at a government level have been working on a number of initiatives with the People's Republic of China and various state companies in China over the past year. We will be announcing very shortly some of the projects that may be coming on stream, etc. But we've been working very closely with them. You would have heard me previously talk about the One Road, One Belt, the Silk Cotton Road, and making an invitation to China for Trinidad and Tobago to become their entry, their gateway to both South and Latin America, South and Central America, come through Trinidad and Tobago with a number of initiatives. These conversations are going very well. They are hopefully going to bear fruit that we'll be able to announce in the coming months. Very importantly, as you know, President Trump is in China right now, and coming out of that conference, the leadership at China looked around the world and decided they would like to meet with 10 world leaders. We're not at liberty at this stage to say who the other 9 are, but I'm pleased to announce that Trinidad and Tobago was chosen as the one from this region. And the Honorable Prime Minister Dr. Rowley has accepted that invitation. We were planning a state visit to China for next year's spring, their spring, which would have been in March of next year. But coming out of that leadership conference at the People's Republic of China, they extended this invitation for Dr. Rowley to attend with 9 other world leaders between the 30th of November and the 3rd of December, high-level meetings, and then to continue thereafter with a state visit from the 4th of December to the 9th of December. Having regard to the stage of the relationship and us building on this relationship with China, the Prime Minister immediately accepted the invitation. We're currently working out the logistics of the trip, and I can say that a very small delegation would be accompanying the Prime Minister, it being a state visit thereafter. His wife, Mrs. Sharon Rowley, would also be accompanying him on this very important trip to China, which, as I said, would take place high-level meetings from the 30th of November, the end of this month, to the 3rd of December in Beijing, and then he will go on to visit other areas in China between the 4th and the 9th on a state visit. So he will have to leave shortly before that. And this is again a trip that is born out of the fruit of a number of negotiations that have been taking place, and the Chinese government recognize the importance that Trinidad and Tobago is playing in this region. One of the things we've been doing as an administration since coming into power in September 2015 is rebuilding our international relationships with very strong ally countries, and also rebuilding Trinidad and Tobago as a leader in the CARICOM. And I think this is a clear endorsement by one of the world superpowers, China, that the recognition of the leadership role that Trinidad and Tobago plays and the importance that we hope to play in a global economy and as part of our diversification program. So the Prime Minister will be accompanied by a very small delegation, and it will include his wife, Mrs. Sharon Rowley, for these meetings between the 30th of November and the 9th of December. And we'll have to put in a couple of days for travel on either end because, as you know, it's a little way off. The last topic that I'd like to address with you all here this afternoon is something that arose in the Sunday Express recently. There was a follow-on story on the Monday Express, and this is to do with allocation of housing at Victoria Keys. The record will show that every time Cabinet made any decision, this Cabinet made any decision with respect to Victoria Keys, we came out and we announced it immediately. As the Minister of Housing put out in a statement earlier this week, and unfortunately certain parts of it were not carried by the Express, and they continued with the misinformation in their Monday story that I'll get to in a short while. What the Minister of Housing said is, at the time when we came into office, we found that there had been a ballooning of expenditure on these Victoria Keys. These apartments were initially built actually when Dr. Rowley was the Minister of Housing way back then, and they were supposed to have been built as low to middle income housing. And they were almost completed by May 2010. Unfortunately, in the period between May 2010 and September 2015, the cost escalated, if I remember the figures correctly, to almost over close to $700 million from an initial cost of around $200 million. What we found is that the apartments were gutted, and as I say, they were almost completed by May 2010. The fixtures and finishings inside were gutted, and they were made into luxury type apartments. This Cabinet coming into office, and by now you would be aware of the economic circumstances and climate we face as a country, took a decision that it would be irresponsible for us not to try to recover the maximum amount on an open market that can be recovered for these high-end luxury type apartments. So the Cabinet took a decision, and I'll remind you all, it was a decision taken in February 2016 as to how we would deal with these units. And the Cabinet took a decision to reserve a certain amount for use by the government of Trinidad and Tobago. As you all would be aware, the government always maintains a certain amount of residences in case there are people coming to work with the government over interim short periods of time, for example, consultants. It works out a lot cheaper to put them in these places than to pay the rates at a Hyatt or at a Hilton hotel or other hotels. So government always maintains. They also maintain this in case of need for accommodation for government ministers, etc. As you are aware, the Salary Review Commission had recommended back, I believe it's in 2013, that there be certain housing allowances for ministers and ministers of state, and in particular, ministers who reside predominantly in Tobago. As everyone is aware, there are 2 seats in Tobago from the House of Representatives, Tobago West and Tobago East, and those 2 MPs are the members of Parliament for Tobago. So predominantly they reside in Tobago, their house is in Tobago, they live in Tobago. But because we have Minister Shamfa Cudjoe, who is the Minister of Tourism, and then we have Minister Ayanna Webster-Roy, who is the Minister of State in the Office of Prime Minister, responsible for gender and children affairs, a decision, according to the SRC, they are allowed certain allowances. Ministers are allowed a housing allowance, as you're all aware. And what this cabinet took a decision with respect to, they were initially being housed at Federation Villas, which I'll come to in a short period of time. But over the period of time, unfortunately, Federation Villas deteriorated, and there had to be a number of repairs to be carried out, etc. When we came into office, we found, despite the millions of dollars, and I have the information here, spent apparently and allegedly on refurbishing these villas for the names that I'll soon tell you about, between the period of 2010 to 2015. When we came into office, these Federation Villas were in a state of rundown, and now it's reached a stage where they need to be properly refurbished and works need to be carried out, because some of them are no longer as habitable as they should be. So this cabinet took a decision in March of this year, on the 16th of March this year, and I believe it was announced at that time, that what we would do is we would provide housing accommodation for certain ministers of government, as well as the Vice President of the Senate, the Chief Secretary of Tobago, and certain professional advisory staff to the Prime Minister. On March 16, 2017, the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago took a decision to allocate, whilst holding office, Victoria Keys housing for both Minister Shamfa Cudjoe as well as the Minister Ayanna Webster Roy. What is important to note is that was a cabinet decision, one. Secondly, the housing allowance to which they're entitled is foregone as a result of that. And actually that is a disadvantage to them. One of the errors that the Express newspaper made on Sunday, it was corrected by us on Monday via a statement from the Minister of Housing, but they repeated it in the follow-on article, is they have suggested that both Minister Shamfa Cudjoe as well as Minister Webster Roy and the Vice President of the Senate, Senator Nigel De Freitas, are occupying and utilizing rent-to-own apartments at Victoria Keys. This is completely untrue, as Minister Mitchell, the Minister of Housing, sought to point out. Unfortunately, the Express repeated that, and having a bit of a legal background myself, I can say that is actually defamatory, and consideration should be given to the pursuit of legal action, because when they were corrected that it was not rent-to-own, it was in fact repeated in the follow-on article. When these ministers give up office and they're no longer in office, or for whatever reason, these premises will be returned to the state. They're owned by the government. I was saying that it is actually a disadvantage to them because they now forego their housing allowance. If they utilize their housing allowance, they could have purchased a property, maybe apply their housing allowance towards a mortgage, so when they left office, they would have premises of their own and in their name, etc. These ministers have not done so because the cabinet took a decision to allocate these properties to them. We would want them in comfortable surroundings and to be comfortable to perform their duties whilst in Trinidad and Tobago. The cabinet also took a decision. So whilst the leader of the opposition has very mischievously said that the Vice President of the Senate is not entitled to a housing allowance, etc., we acknowledge that. But the cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago took a decision in March of this year to provide the Vice President of the Senate, who is from Tobago and resides in Tobago, with one of these units here in Trinidad at Victoria Keys for his accommodation whilst performing official duties here. The cabinet at that time also took a decision to provide two-bedroom units to two advisors to the Prime Minister, Mr. Steve Gardner, who is a project management advisor on physical infrastructure to the Prime Minister, and Dr. John Allen, who is a special advisor to the Prime Minister in agriculture. So these five individuals, the cabinet took a decision in March to provide with housing units at Victoria Keys. None of these units are rent-to-own. All of these units continue to be owned by us, the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. And those who are entitled to housing allowances have had to forego those housing allowances for the provision of this accommodation. To suggest otherwise is quite frankly very mischievous, scandalous, and should not be done. Now, when this arose a decision was taken to try and ascertain from both public administration records as well as the Ministry of Housing records and the HDC records what took place in the period 2010 to 2015. I can now stand here again without fear of contradiction and report to the people of Trinidad and Tobago that it appears as though records have been destroyed, computers have been wiped out of the Ministry of Housing and the Housing Development Corporation with specific reference to what took place during the period of 2010 to 2015. However, we have been able to ascertain from records and then also from persons who dealt with the Federation Villas the following information. During the period of 2010 to 2015, under the Kamala Prasad Bisesa-led administration, the following Federation Villas were assigned to the following individuals. Firstly, a Mr. Dave Tanku. He was assigned Villa number 15 at Federation Villas. A Mr. Shem Baldeo Singh was assigned Villa number 5. Rudal Munilal was assigned Villa number 10. Ashwat Jack was assigned Villa number 3. Delman Baker assigned Villa number 2. Vanilla Allen Toppin assigned Villa number 8, and we're also doing some further investigation because we understand there may be hotel bills at the Hyatt for that period for some of these persons. Mr. Wade Mark and Mr. Jack Warner were also assigned villas but did not utilize them, so that was subsequently set aside. The then Attorney General, Anand Ram Logan, was strangely assigned 2 villas, 1 and 7. A Mr. Barry Padarat was assigned a unit at Flagstaff. One questions why these persons, and a certain number of them, were provided with these villas. We have done a search, as I told you all, under our administration, the 5 individuals who are now being provided with units at Victoria Keys pursuant to a Carbinet decision. We have searched the Carbinet records and we can find absolutely no decision taken by a Carbinet with respect to any of those individuals I've just named being provided with housing at Federation Villas, which were constructed and designed as upscale townhouses for government ministers from Tobago, etc., or for Mr. Barry Padarat at Flagstaff. Interestingly as well, I have just had forwarded to me and I did not have sufficient time to take a look at it. It appears as though Ms. Kamala Prasad Bisesa herself, who as you know has always been resident in Trinidad and Tobago, in a period prior to 2010, so it may have been under the Basio Pandey-led administration, was living in a unit at Flagstaff. The report that I've just had sent to me is about certain equipment, furniture, computer equipment, furniture, etc., that may have been assigned to Ms. Kamala Prasad Bisesa going missing, and a report and an investigation was done during that period in time. So we find as a government and as an administration it being very hypocritical and a non-issue being raised, perhaps it's because there's nothing to talk about, by the opposition to lead a frontal attack on these members of this administration who are at Victoria Keys pursuant to Cabinet decisions. They did not ask for this. They did not put themselves forward for it. Also, the 2 advisors under this administration that I referred to who are being provided housing, that is a Cabinet decision. One questions Mr. Dave Tanku, Mr. Shem Baldeo Singh, and Mr. Barry Padarat. What role is it that they played during the period of 2010 to 2015 that facilitated them being given access to these premises? I have also had provided to me the cost that was incurred during that period for some of these villas and the furnishing of these villas being maintained, the equipment being put into these villas being utilized by those persons I've just referred to, which totaled so far in this preliminary report over $6 million. And one questions what was taking place at that time. The security logs during that time show that a number of persons were also being housed there, foreign consultants, etc. There have been suggestions, and we're now following up on it, that computers were being taken to these premises at Federation Villas during that point in time and being wiped, etc. We are pursuing and looking into these things. So we now call upon the former administration to explain to the people of Trinidad and Tobago why wasn't a cabinet decision taken with respect to the provision of housing at these high-end level housing to these various people that I've named. Some of them have houses in Trinidad and Tobago. For example, Dr. Rudal Munilal, Mr. Anand Ramlogan. Why was he assigned 2 villas? Why was Dr. Munilal assigned 1 villa? And then it's quite hypocritical because we see here Ashworth Jack, who did not sit in cabinet, Delmon Baker and Vanilla Toppin Allen, who were the then members of parliament for the period between 2010 and 2015 for Tobago, being provided with, by us the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, housing premises in Trinidad, presumably whilst they carried out their duties here in Trinidad. And one would recall that Mr. Baker, I think, was actually positioned in Tobago and running a ministry in Tobago at the time. So to come now and to suggest and to lead an attack on the government ministers under this administration who are only at Victoria Keys pursuant to a cabinet decision is something that we denounce and we criticize heavily. And as the paperwork shows, and cabinet has deliberated on it and taken decisions as are recorded for time immemorial in cabinet decisions, the same quite simply does not exist. And I was quite shocked when I set about to do an investigation to find that computer records have been wiped at the HTC, at the Ministry of Housing, and it appears as though files are not being provided out of the Ministry of Public Administration that had a role to play at the time. So far, we've been informed that these Federation villas were under the authority, the purview, and the maintenance and authority of Ms. Jolene John at the HDC, and the then Minister of Housing, Dr. Rudal Munilal. So perhaps now they can explain to us what it was that was taking place and why, in particular, Mr. Barry Padarat was staying at Flagstaff. We have also asked for further information to see who were utilizing any Flagstaff residents during that period of time, but as coming before you all here today, unfortunately, that information has not been provided to me as yet. So we would like to now just say that this is a non-issue with respect to our 2 ministers, the Vice President of the Senate and the 2 advisors to the Prime Minister. As far as we are concerned, every decision was properly taken by the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago, importantly recorded after a deliberation and a decision-making process.